Please be seated. Let me get a couple just quick announcements out of the way. First of all, we had a lovely day yesterday here in the church. So many things were going on. We had a baptism class up here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then we did a funeral for Eleanor Reichendorfer here at 11. There was the knitting group that was meeting in the temporary classrooms. There was not a parking space to be had all over the campus. There was a grants committee meeting going on from 9 to 12 in the conference room at the same time, and then the reception in the parish hall for the funeral following the service. And what I want to talk about is the idea that... Do you want me to use this one instead? All right. Thank you. Okay, so as I was saying, the grants committee met in the conference room from 9 to 12, and if you don't know about the grants committee, what they do is they give upwards of $120,000 every year to over a dozen, usually, agencies and grant recipients. And this takes place from January through April. So right now, a small committee of 12 people is meeting, and they decided yesterday to accept 16 recipients that they want to interview further. So they need 32 people to go out, 2 by 2, to these different agencies and interview them and find out whether they are grant worthy. Right now, Izzy Wynn, who is the coordinator for this grants program, George has pointed to her right there, Izzy has 27 liaisons that she's going to train following this service. So she needs about 5 more. So if we can get 5 more willing people to be liaisons, to serve as liaisons this year, the commitment is not that great, but it is very important. So please see Izzy following this service. And you'll also know that something else is happening this weekend. There's a football game tonight. And to celebrate that, we put in on the opening page of the bulletin there on the bottom, you see that there are a couple inclusions there that are kind of funny. Laura wanted to put it on the front cover, but then she said, no, Peter will flip out, he won't like that. And I said, no, I like it, it's fine. We just didn't do it in New England because we had to do it every year, you know. And after a while, I just get used to it. And so if it's exciting for you guys, I hope your team wins. I hope all your teams win, and you know how I feel about that. All right. So, we're going to talk about prophecy this morning and prophets, because profiting ain't easy. Profiting is not easy. Don't let your babies grow up to be prophets, because it is hard work. It's hard work because prophets tell us what we don't want to hear, and they tell us what we are unable to hear in a lot of instances. Prophets tell us bad news, usually. Those are the prophets that we mostly know. We don't really hear too much about prophets that tell us good news, and that's probably because we expect good news. We hope for good news. But we don't really hear about prophets so much that, well, except for Isaiah, of course, 2nd Isaiah 40. But the idea is that prophets oftentimes bring us bad news. They bring us bad tidings, and so we hear a lot about that. But prophets shine the light on reality. And I think that's sometimes what we don't want to see, because we like to live our lives to some degree in an alternate reality. We like to live our lives in situations where we are the center, where we are uplifted. And not oftentimes do we like to live our lives in a reality when we are seen as less than what we want to see ourselves as. So there are 2 prophetic actions that happen in the readings today. One, of course, is the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah is known by God since he was conceived in the womb. He's set out for being a prophet from long ago, and he's sent to give words of destruction to his people. Not a fun job. So Jeremiah tries to get out of it by using excuses. He says, but I am just a boy. I don't know how to speak. I can't do it. And God said, don't worry, I'm going to do it through you. God's going to give Jeremiah the power to speak these very angry words to his people. And then later we hear the story of Jesus. And if you remember from last week's gospel, Jesus goes to synagogue. We don't get a lot of stories in the gospel about Jesus being in worship, but this is one of them. Jesus goes to the synagogue. He reads the scroll from the prophet Isaiah, which is actually good news, and it says, the blind are being given their sight, the poor are being lifted up, the lame are being healed. This is good news. And Jesus closes up the scroll and very dramatically says, today this scripture is being fulfilled in your sight. The idea being Jesus is somehow in on God's work in the world. So today we pick up that reading from Luke, and the people hear the reading and they're very pleased. This is really interesting. They're very pleased at the outset. They're excited. And you don't know whether it's because Jesus is so well-spoken or they're very proud of him because he's one of them. You don't know whether they're just excited that, hey, we know this guy and he's actually going places. He's doing things with his life. We're excited about that. We don't know why they were so pleased, but they were very excited and very happy with Jesus at that point in time. And then Jesus decides to interpret a little bit. And he says, you're happy with me now because I'm giving you good news. But this good news isn't just for you. And he tells two stories about God's good news coming to people outside of the family, outside of the hometown. It's hard work being a prophet. And Jesus shows us this by saying, this is not all about you guys. This actually extends out from you. And that angered the people so much, it got them so riled up that they wanted to kill him. They actually physically took him out onto the highest hill they could find, and they were going to throw him down the cliff in hopes that they could kill him. And somehow he slipped through their midst and got away. So again, the prophetic task is twofold. With Jeremiah, Jeremiah speaks truth to power. He speaks truth against the kings that were destroying the land. And he says to the people, he says, look, something is going to happen. And a lot of you are going to die. And those of you who don't die are going to be taken away in captivity. And people are going to pass by this town and hiss at it. Yes, this wonderful town of Jerusalem that you all have built and has all this riches. People are going to laugh at it. And actually, neighbors are going to be eating neighbors. This is in the book of Jeremiah. These are the words that the prophet has to speak to his own people. You're going to be eating your neighbors. I mean, it's stark, hard stuff being a prophet. Naturally, Jeremiah was jailed. Naturally, he was beaten. Naturally, he was despondent. And he said, God, why have you seduced me to be your prophet? You have wooed me, and I have no choice but to speak your words, and they are ugly words. But as a prophet, I have no choice. Now, Jesus, he didn't necessarily say anything too ugly, but the people's response was ugly. Essentially, what it comes down to is the people weren't willing to hear what the prophet had to say because they knew the prophet too well. Now think about this. They knew Jesus too well to hear what he had to say to them. And the same is true for us. Sometimes we know people too well in order to see who they really are. We get too close to their identity. And I think sometimes it's the case with us and Jesus. Can you know Jesus too well? Because certainly in the church we talk about, well, do you know Jesus? I know Jesus. I know a lot about Jesus. I want to study Jesus. I read a book about Jesus. I know Jesus. Well, is it possible that you might know him too well? So I think the more maybe you know, the more you strip away the mystery, and the less able you might be able to hear the prophecies and the prophetic word that Jesus might have for you. It's as if Jesus is that friend that holds up a mirror. You know, sometimes you have a friend that can tell you the truth about anything. You've got someone who will hold up some hard truths to you and say, hey, reality is not the way you're presenting it. You've got to sharpen up and look in the mirror and see what's real. Do any of you have a friend like that? Who you can call and say, look, I need the real deal here. Tell me the truth. And they will tell you the unvarnished truth. If you don't have a friend like that, you need one. I think Jesus holds up a mirror to us and says, look at yourself. Really look at yourself. And if we're unable to do that, then we miss out on the healing. And I have a feeling that that's what Jesus was getting at when he said, look, I can't heal you. The prophet can't heal in his own hometown. And the reason is that people won't let him step out of his role. I mean, any of you who have been to a high school reunion in the past 5, 10, 20, 30 years, you remember what this was like. Whether you're 35 or 55, you go into that Holiday Inn meeting room, and all of a sudden you revert back being who you were when you were 16 years old. You can't talk to Leanne because you've got a crush on her, and now she's all that, you know? And you're not going to talk to these guys because they were really cool in high school, and you weren't allowed in their in crowd, and even though they're all, balding and fat, you don't want to talk to them because they're too much for me. And sometimes they won't let you into the circles. They'll just kind of click up on themselves, and they'll see you as, hey, that's that jokester that no one ever took seriously, and I wonder what happened to him. I wonder what he's doing now. You know, you're not allowed to step out of your role that's already been prescribed for you. And I have a feeling that that's might have what happened to Jesus. I think Jesus had a role given to him in his hometown. They knew him as Mary's son, and they knew him as a teacher, but they did not know him as the Messiah. They did not know him as a healer. So I think Jesus wanted to hold up a mirror to that town, but they couldn't see it. They couldn't hear it because they were too close to him. I think in order to be made well, we need to hear a voice that tells us the truth about ourselves, that doesn't allow us to get too high on ourselves or to get too low about ourselves. I know for a lot of us, we're up here a lot, and we kind of say, hey, I'm riding high. I don't need God unless I'm really in trouble. Just tell me how I'm doing. I'm doing pretty good, aren't I? And a lot of us are down here where we say, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. And we need to be brought up sometimes, but other times we need to be brought down to where we really are. And it's hard to hear that prophetic voice because we can be so blind and deaf to the prophets. They tell us what we don't want to hear. They tell us what we resist hearing. They might tell us, hey, you're getting a little cocky. They might tell us, hey, you're not listening to anyone else besides yourself. They might tell us, hey, you need to step out of your own space and meet some other people's needs before you complain about your own needs being met. They might need to tell us, what you want isn't always what you're going to get. Your program, your desires aren't always first in the world. They might need to tell us, stop feeling sorry for yourself. The pity party, while it might make you feel good, doesn't do you any good. Get on and live. You might need to hear those things, but it's hard to hear them because they hurt. It means making ourselves vulnerable. It means opening ourselves up to that different reality that's scary and that sometimes can hurt a little bit. I think prophecy hurts. Hearing the prophetic word hurts, but healing also hurts. The medicine doesn't always taste good. But this is the way that we're healed. This is how light gets shone upon us. This prophetic word that comes in love, and it's rooted in love, and it's true only because it is given in love. You may have heard it said that, whatever is said in love doesn't always have to be true, but whatever is true must be said in love. Prophetic words, when they come to us and are said in love, can be heard and can change our lives. They can shine a light on what was once dark and allow God's healing grace to filter in. We spurn the prophetic word at our own peril. We might want to crumple it up like paper and let it drop into a garbage can. But we realize that when we do it, it comes back to us again and again. Because the prophetic word from God of love never ends. It continues on and is always slipping through our grasp, ready to come around and meet us when we need healing. Amen.